In a world where the speed of screens dictates the rhythm of life, have you stopped to ask what it means to be human? How many times have you felt lost in the noise of shallow opinions, unable to hear the quiet voice within yourself? We live surrounded by endless information, yet do we truly gather wisdom or merely recycle words that are not ours? Can one truly be intelligent in a society that worships profit but abandons the depth of authentic thought? When you look within your own soul, do you find clarity or only a distorted reflection of society's expectations? How many of us fear being different, only to become cheap imitations of models imposed by others around us? Have you noticed that silence, so rare in modern life, can become the loudest scream of our true consciousness? If pure love were placed before your eyes, would you recognize it or laugh at it as if it were childish naivety? Does the endless pursuit of status and power bring us closer to fulfillment or only to an inner emptiness? How many smiles you see every day are nothing but masks hiding a silent pain no one dares to acknowledge? Have you ever wondered if pure kindness still has a place in a world where malice is considered intelligence? Which is worse, being naive enough to suffer for believing, or becoming so cold that you no longer feel anything? What if true madness were not losing reason, but daring to be good in a world that treats goodness as weakness? Could it be that our haste to judge others is just a desperate attempt to avoid facing our own hidden truth? Modern loneliness is not being without people, but being surrounded by them and still remaining unseen inside. How many times have you worn masks just to be accepted, forgetting the true face that quietly lives within you? Isn't it terrifying to realize that many live like characters in someone else's play, never writing their own story? In the darkness of routine and collective cynicism, can a single spark of authentic hope still survive within us? This shared space is more than words. It is a shelter where your mind can finally pause, breathe, and reflect. And here, recalling the haunting pages of Dostoevsky, we realize, perhaps the idiot is not him, but all of us. To understand the idiot, we must first confront the paradox of innocence. Is it strength or is it fragility? Prince Mishkin embodies the raw transparency of a soul, untouched by malice, and that is his greatest danger. In a society built on manipulation, his sincerity appears as madness, exposing the cruelty of the so-called sane. Imagine walking into a room where everyone wears masks, and you, alone, decide to stand with your face uncovered. That is Mishkin, a man who dares to reveal his heart only to be wounded by those terrified of real authenticity. His honesty disrupts the comfortable lies others cling to, and they label him an idiot for refusing to conform. How many times in your own life have you been punished for speaking truth where silence would have been safer? Perhaps you remember moments when kindness was mistaken for weakness, leaving you feeling out of place. Society often teaches us to sharpen our words as weapons, yet mocks the one who speaks gently with compassion. Is it possible that what we call idiocy is in fact the last remnant of innocence in a corrupted civilization? Mishkin's vision of the world is not clouded by cynicism. He sees people as souls, not as tools or obstacles. That is why his presence is both magnetic and unbearable. He reflects back to others the truth they fear most. Standing near such purity forces others to confront the darkness they would rather ignore within themselves. The result is rejection, because it is easier to mock the light than to admit the shadows that control our lives. We laugh at the one who loves sincerely, but inside we secretly envy the courage to love without conditions. His so-called foolishness becomes a mirror of our cowardice, and that is why he disturbs the order of the crowd. Dostoevsky does not offer us a hero who conquers with strength, but one who reveals power through weakness. Mishkin's suffering becomes a lesson. Society fears innocence more than crime, because innocence cannot be bent. Have you noticed how truth, when spoken softly, often creates more chaos than lies shouted from the rooftops? That is because truth shakes the foundations of illusions that people desperately need to maintain their sanity. Mishkin's tragedy is not only personal, it is a reflection of every society that destroys what it cannot explain. Think of the prophets, philosophers, and visionaries who were exiled, mocked, or executed for speaking truth. Socrates crucified Christ, even modern whistleblowers, Each was seen as dangerous for refusing to follow lies. Mishkin joins this lineage, not as a genius of intellect, but as a genius of sincerity in an age of corruption. His naive love collides with a world addicted to power, and in that collision we see the anatomy of collapse. Dostoevsky forces us to ask, is society sick because it rejects truth, or is truth unbearable in a sick society? The idiocy is not in Mishkin's heart, but in the blindness of those who despise him for what they secretly lack. And yet, within that blindness, Dostoevsky reveals the seed of our modern tragedy, still alive in our own world. We too mock what is pure, celebrate what is cynical, and call this inversion of values a mark of intelligence. Thus, the first warning emerges. Perhaps our modern world is not advanced, but simply a more efficient cruelty. If Mishkin is a mirror of innocence, then the society around him is a theater of masks built on fragile illusions. Each character in the novel becomes a living metaphor of how people protect their wounds by inflicting new ones. The manipulator needs deception, the proud need applause, and the wounded need to wound others to feel alive. Mishkin, standing among them, is like a candle in a storm, fragile yet revealing what the darkness tries to hide. His presence threatens the order of corruption because he does not participate in its silent contracts of lies. How many times in life have you felt pressured to agree with something false just to avoid being cast aside? Society thrives on this silent pact. We all pretend together, and anyone who refuses becomes the enemy of all. Mishkin breaks that pact not by rebellion, but by living transparently, and that alone makes him intolerable. People fear those who cannot be manipulated because their freedom exposes the chains the rest choose to carry. In our modern world, think of those who speak openly against injustice. Often they are silenced or ridiculed. The system does not fear violence because it knows how to control it. It fears sincerity, which cannot be tamed. Mishkin's vulnerability reveals how corrupt systems crumble when faced with the disarming power of honesty. Imagine a child telling the truth in a room of adults, hiding secrets. Suddenly the child becomes dangerous. We laugh at such moments, yet within that laughter is the trembling fear of being unmasked by simple words. The true madness of humanity is not violence, but the hatred of anything that exposes our fragile hypocrisy. When Dostoevsky presents Mishkin as a fool, he is really asking us, what does our rejection of innocence reveal? Perhaps it reveals that our civilization does not seek truth, but comfort in illusions that justify our cruelty. We prefer cynicism because it feels clever, while sincerity feels vulnerable, and therefore unbearable to sustain. But can a society survive on cynicism alone, or does it eventually collapse under the weight of its own lies? Look at our world today. Political corruption, fake news, broken trust, all symptoms of this same disease. The disease is not simply dishonesty, it is the hatred of truth when spoken without armor, without disguise. Mishkin's so-called idiocy is the courage to live without disguise, and that makes him unbearable to the crowd. Every culture builds defenses against pain, but those defenses often become prisons where no real love can enter. Mishkin refuses the prison, and in doing so he shows how freedom is both terrifying and transformative. Isn't it strange that we admire strength in fiction, but despise it when it appears as vulnerability in life? Dostoevsky turns this contradiction into a mirror. He asks whether we are brave enough to face ourselves. Perhaps we fear purity not because it is weak, but because it reveals how far we have drifted from our essence. In mocking innocence, we confirm our own corruption, and we mistake this confirmation for wisdom. The danger of Mishkin's world is the same as ours. When truth is mocked long enough, lies become the norm. And when lies become the norm, the collapse of meaning follows, and no society can survive without meaning. To grasp the full weight of the idiot, we must see how innocence does not exist in a vacuum but collides with greed. Mishkin enters a society obsessed with wealth and status, and his simplicity exposes the emptiness of their pursuits. What meaning does money hold if it only buys admiration from people too shallow to love us for who we are? Dostoevsky paints wealth not as liberation, but as another form of imprisonment hidden under golden decorations. The characters around Mishkin cling to possessions as shields, yet their eyes betray the hunger of unsatisfied souls. How many in our modern world exhaust themselves chasing wealth only to discover loneliness in their victories? The modern skyscraper and the Russian mansion are built on the same fragile foundation, fear of insignificance. Mishkin, with no obsession for riches, becomes an insult to those who define worth by the numbers they possess. His poverty of material ambition is actually a wealth of spirit, and that paradox unsettles the powerful most. Isn't it striking how society ridicules those who step out of its economic rat race, calling them failures? Yet, secretly, many envy those who refuse to sacrifice peace of mind for endless competition and hollow applause. The tragedy is that envy quickly turns to hostility, for society punishes any model that threatens its illusions. Mishkin does not condemn wealth, but his very existence questions its ultimate meaning, and that is unbearable. Imagine being told that the life you sacrificed everything for, status, pride, admiration, was built on sand. That realization does not free people, it terrifies them, for it means they must face their wasted years. Mishkin's gift is seeing human beings as more than economic roles, but this gift makes him a disruptive force. The idiot is not the man who rejects wealth, but the one who believes wealth alone can secure happiness. In this sense, Dostoevsky prophesies our own century, where consumerism thrives, yet depression deepens. We create technologies to accumulate faster, yet find ourselves emptier, proving that abundance without meaning is void. The endless desire for more blinds us to the possibility that enough could already be salvation for our souls. Mishkin, by living without greed, demonstrates that freedom is not owning more, but needing less to be whole. This freedom terrifies those chained to possessions, for it reveals their prison is self-imposed and unbreakable. How often have you seen people defend harmful systems simply because they fear losing their fragile security? Greed disguises itself as progress, but Dostoevsky unmasks it as despair, wrapped in the illusion of control. The collapse of meaning begins when value is measured not by virtue or wisdom, but by price tags and applause. Mishkin's quiet life stripped of vanity is a warning. Civilizations obsessed with wealth rot from the inside. His presence whispers a question into every ear. If you lost everything material, would you still know who you are? For many, the answer is silence, for identity has been sold to the market in exchange for fragile admiration. Dostoevsky reminds us that the real idiot is the one who believes money can purchase peace, love, or eternity. And so the novel warns us, a society that worships wealth above truth will eventually devour its own humanity. If greed reveals the fragility of society, then power exposes its cruelty, for power without morality always corrupts. In The Idiot, power appears not as noble responsibility but as a weapon used to dominate, humiliate, and control. Mishkin's refusal to play power games makes him dangerous, for he cannot be bought, manipulated, or threatened. Those around him see this not as strength but as weakness, because they cannot imagine power without violence. And yet, true power is not the ability to coerce others, but the rare ability to remain unchanged by corruption. Mishkin embodies this paradox, powerless in worldly terms, yet unshakable in a world that thrives on betrayal. How often have you seen in modern life people who rise to positions of influence only to lose their humanity? The corridors of politics and corporations echo with the same emptiness Dostoevsky described centuries ago. Titles and positions are merely costumes, yet people cling to them as if they were eternal crowns of meaning. Mishkin does not wear such costumes, and that nakedness of spirit terrifies those who live behind false authority. It is easier to mock him than to face the truth. Power without love is not power, but only organized cruelty. We too live in an age where power is admired more for its capacity to dominate than for its ability to heal. Mishkin's gentleness forces us to ask, when did gentleness become incompatible with strength in human eyes? Perhaps it was the moment when we confused fear with respect and control with genuine leadership of the soul. In today's world, leaders are often applauded not for wisdom, but for their ability to silence and intimidate. But what is the worth of such leadership if it builds obedience through fear rather than growth through trust? Dostoevsky exposes this paradox with cruelty. The fool is not the gentle man, but the world that despises him. The novel suggests that true authority comes not from dominance, but from the courage to remain incorruptible. Have you noticed how rare it is to meet someone unshaken by ambition, untouched by the hunger for control? Such people are seen as outsiders, for they cannot be absorbed into the machinery that worships domination. Myshkin's tragedy is that his purity of heart is mistaken for impotence, when in truth it is unshakable power. His rejection of manipulation unveils a truth. Power divorced from ethics is already a form of self-destruction. The powerful in the novel unravel because their force is hollow, while Myshkin endures because he is whole. In our society, we too measure success by how many bow down, rather than how many rise up through our presence. But true greatness is not bending others to our will, it is creating spaces where others can flourish freely. Myshkin's so-called weakness is the very medicine our world refuses to swallow, preferring poison disguised as power. We celebrate conquest yet ignore the wounds it leaves, as if domination could ever heal the human condition. Dostoevsky's warning is clear. The lust for power is the seed of decay, and civilizations fall when it takes root. A society that mocks gentleness while praising cruelty is already preparing its own funeral in silence. And so, the idiot becomes the prophet, and the world in its arrogance refuses to hear the wisdom of weakness. If power reveals corruption, then love in the idiot reveals tragedy, for even affection becomes poisoned by ego. Dostoevsky does not present love as a gentle escape, but as a battlefield where desire and purity collide violently. Myshkin loves with innocence, yet his love is constantly misinterpreted as weakness, pity, or naive foolishness. Those around him are unable to believe in selfless affection, for they only know love as possession and control. Isn't it painful to see how even today people confuse love with ownership, chaining others to their expectations? Myshkin gives without demanding, but this gift becomes unbearable for those who cannot imagine love without gain. His tenderness exposes the transactional nature of their desires, and they retaliate by rejecting his sincerity. In this way, love becomes not a bridge, but a mirror, reflecting the corruption of those who cannot embrace it. How many times in life have you witnessed love turn toxic simply because one heart sought to dominate the other? Our society sings of love in songs and films, yet quietly trains us to see it as conquest rather than communion. Myshkin's tragedy is that his heart is too pure for a culture that mistrusts anything that cannot be exploited. His affection is a light, but those blinded by pride and fear interpret it as a fire meant to consume them. The novel reminds us that love without ego is so rare that when it appears, people mistake it for madness. Perhaps this is why genuine kindness often feels unsettling. It reveals how little of it exists within us. How often have you met someone whose gentleness made you suspicious, as if goodness itself must hide an agenda? Myshkin's love is precisely this kind of unsettling purity, making others laugh nervously or recoil in disbelief. Dostoevsky shows that society cannot handle love untainted by manipulation, for it undermines every false bond. When love is free, it destroys the economy of desire built on bargaining, jealousy, and desperate control. And so what should heal becomes a wound, not because of the giver, but because of the corruption of receivers. This paradox resonates with our own time, where vulnerability in love is mocked and detachment is praised as wise. People fear being seen as too soft, forgetting that true strength is measured by the courage to remain open. Myshkin's openness is punished because it reveals the cowardice of those who cannot risk being hurt for real love. And yet without this vulnerability, love becomes only a shadow, a transaction of comfort without transformation. The fool, then, is not the man who dares to love sincerely, but the one who reduces love to selfish calculation. How tragic that in both Dostoevsky's Russia and our own age, love is mistrusted the moment it ceases to dominate. Myshkin's devotion is the antidote, yet society spits it out, preferring the poison it has grown addicted to. In mocking his love, they reveal their own emptiness, and in destroying him, they destroy the hope of healing. The warning echoes: when love itself is corrupted, no structure of society can endure without crumbling inside. What remains is a world where connection is shallow, affection is commodified, and loneliness becomes epidemic. And thus, Dostoevsky warns us, love without purity is no love at all, only a mask covering the hunger of despair. If love reveals tragedy, then suffering in the idiot reveals truth, for pain unmasks illusions that comfort hides. Dostoevsky does not romanticize suffering, but he shows how it strips away the masks people cling to for safety. Mishkin suffers not because he is foolish, but because his purity collides with a world allergic to authenticity. His pain becomes a lens, magnifying the cruelty of others, while also exposing the depth of his own humanity. Isn't it striking how suffering often becomes the most honest teacher, one we resist yet cannot escape? In our own lives, pain has the strange power to reveal priorities, breaking illusions we thought were permanent. We discover who we are not in comfort, but in the furnace of loss, rejection, and the collapse of false hopes. Mishkin's suffering is not a punishment, but a revelation. He suffers because he refuses to abandon sincerity. Many people numb their pain with distractions, yet pain unacknowledged grows into despair that corrodes silently. Dostoevsky insists that to avoid suffering is to avoid truth, for the two are inseparable in the human journey. Mishkin teaches that pain embraced with openness becomes transformative, shaping the soul into deeper awareness. How often do we see in modern culture the obsession with avoiding discomfort at any cost, even at truth's expense? We build industries around numbing, endless entertainment, consumerism, addictions, all shields from reality. Yet when the shield breaks, we discover that suffering we avoided has been patiently waiting for recognition. Mishkin lives without such shields, and his suffering becomes public, a scandal to those who hide behind smiles. His seizures symbolize this vulnerability, sudden collapses that reveal the fragility of body and spirit alike. Instead of compassion, society sees weakness, proving how blind it is to the universality of human fragility. How many times have you hidden your struggles because you feared being judged rather than understood? This fear is the silent chain of modern society. We must appear strong even when we are breaking inside. Mishkin refuses the chain. He suffers openly, and in that openness he reveals a strength greater than denial. True strength is not the absence of pain, but the ability to endure it without surrendering to bitterness. Dostoevsky invites us to see suffering not as humiliation, but as an initiation into the deeper layers of the self. The world despises this view because it demands courage to look pain in the eyes rather than numb it away. And yet every culture that denies suffering ends up producing shallow people who cannot endure true crisis. Mishkin shows us that the heart that suffers sincerely becomes capable of love no false comfort could ever teach. Without suffering, love remains shallow. With suffering, it becomes rooted in truth that nothing can shake. The fool, then, is not the one who suffers, but the one who flees from suffering, only to live in fragile denial. Perhaps this is Dostoevsky's cruelest warning. To fear suffering is to fear the very door to transformation. A world that anesthetizes itself against pain will eventually lose its capacity for compassion and meaning. And so, suffering, though hated, becomes the birthplace of wisdom, revealing truths too heavy for illusions to bear. If suffering reveals truth, then madness in the idiot reveals society's fear, for what it rejects it calls insane. Prince Mishkin is labeled the idiot, not because he lacks reason, but because his reason contradicts corruption. Madness becomes society's convenient label for anyone who dares to live outside the logic of greed and deceit. Isn't it ironic that conformity, which often destroys souls, is seen as sanity, while freedom is branded madness? Dostoevsky asks us, who is truly sick? The one who lives by love, or the crowd that mocks love as foolishness? Mishkin's presence turns every room into a stage where hypocrisy trembles, and hypocrisy always attacks exposure. The nervous laughter he provokes is not joy but fear, the fear of being unmasked by a man who refuses to wear masks. Society cannot bear such nakedness, so it declares him unstable, protecting itself from the shame of recognition. How many times have you seen truth-tellers dismissed as crazy just to preserve the comfort of the majority? In our world, this happens daily. Whistleblowers, prophets, visionaries, all silenced under the cloak of madness. Mishkin belongs to this lineage, proving that society weaponizes the word insane to maintain its illusions. What appears foolish is often wisdom unrecognized, because it does not fit the categories of a corrupted mind. Isn't it tragic that genuine innocence appears threatening, while manipulation and cruelty are considered normal? Madness, then, is not in Mishkin, but in the world that cannot tolerate a man who loves without hidden motives. The novel forces us to ask, are we sane because we conform, or are we merely trained actors in a collective play? Perhaps modern sanity is nothing but well-adjusted despair, numbness accepted as the price of belonging. Mishkin, in refusing despair, appears insane because he embodies a hope that cynicism cannot comprehend. His very existence exposes the sickness of a world that rejects joy as naive and worships pain as intelligence. How often do we celebrate dark humor while mocking tenderness, as if cruelty were more sophisticated than love? Dostoevsky unmasks this inversion, showing that what society calls maturity may simply be corrupted resignation. Mishkin's supposed madness is his refusal to adapt to corruption, and that refusal is the novel's central light. In this sense, madness becomes holiness, the courage to remain whole when the world demands fragmentation. But holiness is intolerable in corrupt systems because it threatens the very logic that keeps them alive. This is why prophets are killed, philosophers silenced, and visionaries mocked. They disturb the order of lies. Mishkin joins them as a living question. Is sanity truly sanity if it demands the death of authenticity? The fool, then, is not the one who is different, but the crowd that crucifies difference for its own comfort. Perhaps we too have laughed at sincerity, labeling it childish to protect ourselves from admitting our emptiness. Dostoevsky's dark warning is this: the more we ridicule innocence, the more insane our society becomes. A civilization that mocks compassion is not advancing, it is descending proudly into the abyss of its own ruin. And thus, madness becomes the mask of truth, while society dances blind, convinced it alone is sane. If madness reveals society's fear, then beauty in the idiot reveals contradiction, for it both inspires and destroys. Dostoevsky famously suggests that beauty will save the world, yet in his novel, beauty often leads to ruin. Mishkin perceives beauty as purity of soul, while others reduce it to appearance, desire, and shallow attraction. This tension creates tragedy, because what should elevate humanity is reduced to another instrument of corruption. Isn't it painful to see how modern culture turns beauty into commodity, stripping it of mystery and depth? Beauty in advertising, social media, and entertainment becomes a weapon, shaping desire and enslaving identity. Mishkin, however, recognizes beauty in vulnerability, sincerity, and truth, not in masks or artificial ideals. His definition threatens those who profit from illusions because it strips beauty of its market value and control. Imagine a society where beauty is not bought or sold, but lived in kindness, humility, and authentic presence. That vision seems utopian, yet it exposes how enslaved we are to the tyranny of surfaces over inner substance. In The Idiot, characters are destroyed by their obsession with beauty as possession, not beauty as revelation. Isn't this the same as today's endless race for validation through appearances that never satisfy the soul? We chase physical perfection, ignoring the decay of our inner lives, and call this shallow pursuit sophistication. Dostoevsky shows that beauty without morality is a knife, capable of captivating, but also of inflicting harm. Mishkin alone insists that true beauty must be linked to goodness, or else it becomes merely another form of power. How many times have we admired beauty while ignoring cruelty hidden behind it, pretending not to see the truth? In this way, beauty becomes dangerous, because it blinds us to vice when wrapped in charm and elegance. Our culture repeats this error daily, idolizing celebrities, politicians, and influencers regardless of virtue. Beauty, divorced from ethics, becomes seduction, united with goodness, it becomes salvation. Mishkin embodies this truth, yet his voice is drowned by the shouts of those intoxicated by shallow desire. His appreciation for beauty is not desire to possess, but reverence for the divine spark within human souls. This reverence unsettles others because it cannot be controlled, purchased, or reduced to selfish gratification. Isn't it tragic that we find it easier to worship a flawless face than to honor a compassionate heart? Dostoevsky forces us to confront this paradox. Beauty can save the world, but only if it is bound to goodness. Otherwise, beauty becomes another idol, enslaving hearts instead of liberating them from the chains of vanity. Mishkin's vision of beauty is prophetic. He reminds us that true salvation begins where beauty meets virtue. Without this union, beauty becomes poison, and society will consume itself while applauding its own reflection. The danger is not beauty itself, but our blindness to its deeper meaning beyond desire and possession. And so, the idiot becomes the only one who truly sees beauty, while the wise remain blind in their arrogance. This is Dostoevsky's paradox. Beauty is salvation, but only if we dare to see with eyes unclouded by corruption. If beauty exposes contradiction, then morality in the idiot exposes collapse, for ideals crumble under human weakness. Dostoevsky does not describe morality as a set of rules, but as a battlefield where conscience and desire collide. Mishkin's moral compass is clear. He chooses compassion, honesty, and truth, even when they cost him everything. Society, however, views morality not as truth but as convenience, shifting its standards whenever power demands it. How many times in our modern age have we seen people bend their values for profit, applause, or social approval? We praise morality when it benefits us, but we abandon it the moment it requires sacrifice or uncomfortable truth. Mishkin's tragedy is that his uncompromising morality shines a light on the hypocrisy others desperately protect. His goodness becomes unbearable, for it reveals how hollow the so-called respectable morality of others truly is. Isn't it telling that people often admire virtue from afar, but despise it when it challenges their way of living? The world is not hostile to morality in words, but it is hostile to morality in action, lived without compromise. Dostoevsky shows us that morality without courage is a mask, and society thrives on masks more than authenticity. Mishkin refuses the mask, and in doing so he becomes intolerable, for his life makes others feel exposed. We see this pattern in history. Prophets, reformers, saints, all attacked for living truth others could not bear. Modern society repeats the cycle, punishing whistleblowers, silencing integrity, rewarding corruption instead. What is mocked as foolish morality is often the last fragile shield against the collapse of collective meaning. Mishkin demonstrates that morality without love is legalism, but morality with love is salvation for the soul. Society prefers legality because it is controllable, while love cannot be tamed, and that frightens the powerful. Isn't it strange that the purest moral acts are often invisible, done quietly by those society calls insignificant? The fool is not the one who lives with integrity, but the one who trades conscience for comfort and convenience. Dostoevsky reveals that civilization begins to rot the moment morality becomes a performance instead of conviction. This rot spreads quickly, infecting institutions, relationships, and even the private heart with silent decay. Mishkin's life is an antidote, yet the antidote is rejected because truth is always too bitter for corrupted tongues, and so morality becomes not a guide, but a theater where people applaud virtue and practice hypocrisy backstage. Our modern world repeats this theater daily, applauding justice in words while rewarding injustice in deeds. Mishkin's naive morality is not weakness but radical resistance because it refuses to join the play of hypocrisy. True morality is not about appearing good, but about remaining whole when everyone else fragments for survival. Society calls this idiocy because it cannot imagine integrity without reward or sacrifice without recognition. But Dostoevsky insists, without such fools humanity has no hope, for morality without love is only a mask. The novel forces us to ask whether we too have sold our integrity in exchange for the applause of the crowd. And if so, the dark warning is clear. Morality abandoned for convenience always leads to the collapse of meaning. If morality reveals collapse, then destiny in the idiot reveals inevitability, for innocence cannot survive corruption. Dostoevsky does not grant Mishkin a happy ending because his purpose is not comfort but awakening for the reader. Mishkin's downfall is the mirror we fear to look into, for it shows how society devours what it cannot understand. His fate is not accident but prophecy. The world cannot tolerate truth, purity, and love without attempting to kill them. Isn't it tragic that history repeats this cycle endlessly, as if humanity were addicted to destroying its healers? Socrates drank poison, Christ was crucified, countless prophets silenced. Mishkin joins this eternal chorus of martyrs. His end is not weakness but revelation, reminding us that light, though defeated, exposes darkness by its very fall. The so-called idiot becomes the ultimate seer, proving that truth shines brightest in the ruins of rejection. Dostoevsky does not let us escape with false hope. He confronts us with the weight of our own collective cruelty. Mishkin's silence at the end is louder than speeches, for it reveals the futility of innocence in a corrupt system. And yet, within that silence lies an unspoken question. Will we repeat the cycle or dare to break it? In our modern age, this question is even more urgent, for corruption has become institutionalized and globalized. Technology connects us, but also magnifies deception, making illusions spread faster than truth can take root. The tragedy of Mishkin becomes prophecy for us. Purity will always be mocked, but without it, we lose our humanity. Isn't it haunting that we still call honest people naive and corrupt people clever, as if wisdom were inversion? Dostoevsky shows us that the collapse of innocence is not only a personal tragedy, but a civilizational one. When purity is destroyed, what remains is cynicism, and cynicism cannot sustain a world without consuming it. Mishkin's fate asks, do we want survival built on lies, or renewal built on the painful courage of truth? Our modern institutions, politics, business, media, mirror the same blindness that devoured Mishkin in his time. The story is not distant history. It is a diagnosis of our present illness, one we continue to deny. Each rejection of authenticity is another step toward collapse, even if hidden beneath the mask of progress. Dostoevsky whispers through Mishkin, civilizations die not when they lack wealth, but when they lack truth. His idiocy becomes a test for us. Do we dare to embrace sincerity, or will we laugh until we destroy ourselves? Isn't it telling that the qualities we need most, compassion, honesty, innocence, are the ones we despise the most? Mishkin's destiny proves that truth is never comfortable, for it demands the death of our illusions to be reborn. The fool's tragedy is that he sees what others cannot, but his vision is mocked until the world collapses. And yet within this tragedy lies a seed of hope. Even in rejection, truth leaves behind an echo for the future. That echo becomes our responsibility, for every generation decides whether to repeat destruction or seek renewal. Dostoevsky ends with despair, but his despair is meant to awaken us, to shake us from numbness into awareness. And so, the final warning is this: unless we learn to honor innocence, love, and truth, we too are already doomed. Do not fear being different, for in a world addicted to masks, authenticity is the rarest form of courage. When society mocks your sincerity, remember that mockery is often the shield of those terrified by your truth. The strength of your heart is not measured by how well you dominate, but by how deeply you can still remain gentle. If you must choose between being clever or being kind, choose kindness, for cleverness without love is empty. Let suffering not harden you into bitterness, but refine you into wisdom that no illusion can take away. True wealth is not the accumulation of possessions, but the freedom to live without needing endless validation. Do not mistake noise for meaning. Silence often carries truths that words in their haste cannot fully reveal. When others laugh at innocence, know that their laughter hides fear of what they have lost and no longer recover. Beauty without goodness is an empty shell. Seek the kind of beauty that heals rather than the one that enslaves. Morality is not performance. It is the quiet strength to remain whole when compromise would be easier. If love feels dangerous, it is because real love demands the death of ego to allow the birth of something greater. Remember that what society calls weakness may be the very medicine it needs but refuses to swallow. Do not be ashamed of tenderness. Tenderness is strength refined, a flame that endures when violence burns out. Every time you reject hypocrisy, you plant seeds of truth, even if the soil of your world is not ready to grow them. Let pain become your teacher, not your jailer. Through it, you will discover the clarity that comfort cannot offer. When the world tells you to laugh at innocence, stand firm, for only innocence can save us from endless despair. Do not sell your integrity for applause. Applause fades, but the loss of the soul leaves an eternal silence. If people call you a fool for choosing compassion, wear the insult proudly, for you stand where truth still lives. Remember, civilizations collapse not from poverty of resources, but from poverty of meaning and love. And as you leave this reflection, carry within you the quiet certainty that you are not alone in this journey. Share your thoughts, leave your mark, and let this space continue to be a place where your soul feels seen.